Today. Today we have Dr. Gary Mullins. He is the Regional Director for Sub-Saharan Africa, working out of the Borlaug Institute. Basically, overall, he has 23 years of experience in Africa. He started in the Peace Corps in Cameroon, and then followed that up and did his doctorate in agricultural economics at Oklahoma State, did 7 years with the CEG, worked at the IITA with Dr. Singh, and then did some work at the International Research Institute where he worked with livestock. So he's going to present for us today.
Well, thank you everyone for committing your lunch hour to spend with me. I hope you'll find it worthwhile. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm still quite new to Texas A&M. I arrived in College Station in July, picked up my position with the Borlaug Institute. It's been a real pleasure. I've been very, honestly speaking, quite overwhelmed at the breadth and as well as the depth of expertise and resources that we have here at A&M. So I want to do my part to share what I can to broaden your experience and your education while here. In thinking about what you might find interesting, I cast a fairly wide net. I know that when we begin to talk about genetically modified organisms, that's been a pretty hot topic for quite some time. But it continues to be one that we actually grapple with at the Borlaug Institute. And I'm sure that many of you are wondering just what position we take on GMOs at the Borlaug Institute. While we are still developing our formal policy, I can say that essentially we consider all available technologies, taking into account the risk associated with those technologies. So that's where we have it at present. That's where we are with it. But so this presentation today is something of an exploration, and I certainly welcome your participation. But I did want to note that disclaimer from the beginning. I am an agricultural economist. I have worked with crops, I've worked with livestock, worked in agribusiness, and in all of those areas, GM biotech has and continues to play an important role. And let me also ask your forgiveness if I don't use this technology properly the first time. Here we go. Quickly, a bit about the Borlaug Institute. I don't know how many of you are familiar with it. It is named after Dr. Norman Borlaug, world-renowned plant breeder, scientist, and the only agriculturalist ever to have received the Nobel Prize. He finished his career here at A&M, and it was in 1984 that they renamed the Office of International Programs after Dr. Borlaug. In 2006, the Board of Regents recognized the center officially. Our mission, as you can see, is to employ agricultural science to feed the hungry and support equity, economic growth, quality of life, and mutual respect among people. That's a very broad mission statement, but what I would have you focus on and what distinguishes us among many other development-focused agencies, organizations, is our use of science. We're committed to that. We are present in a period of expansion. We have, in the last 6 months, created 4 regional offices, one for Asia, one for North Africa and the Middle East, for Latin America, and of course for Sub-Saharan Africa. What I draw your attention to here is our focus on resource-poor agricultural communities. While we do look at scaling up and commercialization, very important for sustainability, our initial starting point are the resource-poor communities throughout the developing world. We continue to grow in terms of our internal partnerships here in the Texas A&M University system as well as externally. Most of our work, I would venture to say, is with external partners. We do a lot of work with the U.S. Agency for International Development, with the Latin America Development Bank, governments, those types of agencies. But it is fundamental to our work that we continue our scholarly activities, conducting our own personal research, and working in partnership with other individuals and organizations at Texas A&M. I'm not really fond of this map, but I think it's a bit too busy, but it does a pretty good job of drawing our attention to where the big issues are when it comes to food insecurity. Notably, the heart of the issue is in Africa, both above the Sahel and below. But as you can see, there's a high concentration of these 1 billion undernourished individuals on the African continent. And it would then be a surprise to you that most of our largest programs at the Borlaug Institute are targeted on sub-Saharan Africa. I put together just a quick graph looking at the prevalence of undernutrition and compared the status in Africa and sub-Saharan Africa to other regions in the world. Very quickly you'll see that unfortunately, in this case, sub-Saharan Africa and Africa lead when it comes to prevalence of undernutrition. I find that definition, which is taken from the state of food insecurity in the world, to be a rather interesting one, because it's one of the few that I've run across. It doesn't distinguish between children, the under 5s, which is quite typical. You see the number of children, percentage of children under 5. This is across populations. So what these figures reflect, this prevalence, is the probability of a randomly selected individual from a population that consumes less than the number of calories required for an active and healthy life. While all of the trends show a downward slope or a downward trend, the differences, the absolute differences between the regions and sub-Saharan Africa are quite vast. Currently just under 25%, let's call it 25%. The next closest would be Asia, which is only about 13. So the prevalence of undernutrition in Africa is double that of its next closest rival, you would say. Developed regions have been below 5% for since 2002 to date. So significant difference between the regions. Although the positive news is that there does seem to be some downward trending. I thought to bring this home to as plant breeders, agronomists, etc., by focusing on a crop that's probably very familiar to you. Now, I may slip and refer to this as maize. At least on the continent of Africa, we don't talk about corn, we talk about maize. Here in North America, we make a distinction between what is consumed by humans and what is consumed by animals. But in terms of production of corn, and this is taken from, this is based on 2013 estimates, among the top 20 producers of corn, you'll see only one African country, well, actually three appear. South Africa at number 10, Nigeria, and Ethiopia. Corn, though, is significant that I chose this because for those of you who have been to the continent or are from the continent, we actually recognize maize as one of our staples in our diet. It varies a bit whether you're in the equatorial region of East or Central Africa, but maize can be found across the continent, everywhere. So it's very important. So it's notable. These production levels are quite notable. And to give you a further impression of how they compare relative to the major producers, the United States and China, you see that South Africa at number 10 is only producing 3.6% of what is produced in this country, even though it is a major staple in the diet. And you can see the absolute quantities there are minute compared to those of the leading producers. Coming at it from a different direction, if we look at growth in the production, who's making the fastest advances in production of maize, you'll find 7 countries here. But what is, and the growth rates are quite astounding, really, quite notable. 104% for Lesotho, Angola over 55%, Guinea-Bissau. But what I would have you note quickly is that these are very, well, they're either very small countries, Lesotho, Gambia, or they are countries which are experiencing rapid economic growth as a result primarily of their petroleum exports. So a lot of that money is being pumped back into agricultural production of the crop. The figure that I would have you most note, though, are the yields on the continent. Looking at, again, I started with the top 20 producers of maize by yield, metric tons per hectare. Divide by 2.5 if you want acres, and you'll see that you have to drop down as low as number 34 before you pick up any African producers. The yields in the top 5 producing countries are 2.5 times what are being experienced or obtained in South Africa. And the next highest producer comes in at number 48, Ethiopia, with only 3 metric tons. So that gives you some impression of the state of the art, the state of agriculture, in relation to a very important crop on the continent. Looking at some background as to why there are those extreme differences, and this doesn't encompass everything. When we begin to look at the amount of biotech crops being grown in this country versus Africa, you see 93% of all soybeans, 90% of all feed corn, maize, and 90% of all cotton is now biotech, at least according to U.S. Department of Agriculture records. What's behind that? What has led our country to adopt this technology so rapidly? Well, the public information asserts that it's essentially an economic decision. That because of the ability to reduce the costs associated with producing, in this case, corn, soybean, cotton, it becomes a very attractive technology. There's a lot of incentive to adopt it. And to me, as an agricultural economist, it gives a lot of insight as to what's driving farmer decisions. So why would Africa be opposed to adopting biotech? Again, this is not my own slide, and I think it's far too busy. But the International Service for Acquisition of Agribiotech Applications, ISAAA, monitors adoption of biotechnology and including GMOs, and they did this very simple map looking at which countries are the mega countries. They are in green here. So it's not surprising that the United States and then Brazil being one of the major adopters of biotechnology here. However, in Africa, you're still very limited to just South Africa, to Sudan, and to Guinea-Bissau here. The drivers here being cotton in these two countries, and maize in South Africa. Among the top 10, in terms of hectarage, only South Africa appears from Africa, and it's still well below. If you look at the million of hectares in South Africa at 2.9, it's easily 30 times less than that in the United States. Sudan comes in at here at 19. Oh, I guess I'm sorry. I think I identified Burkina Faso as Guinea-Bissau. I'm sorry. That's because of the mention of it earlier. Burkina Faso, again, cotton. The ISAAA made a number of observations this year in terms of biotechnology and its adoption. Its growth is up 3% from last year, not a lot. However, they do make the observation that over the 18-year period of 1996 to 2013, the hectarage under biotech crops has increased more than 100-fold. So very sharp, very rapid adoption of the technology. Again, though, predominantly in North America, Latin America. And one of the factoids, if you will, that was in this report that I found particularly interesting, and I have inserted the italics, is that a couple of thousand American farmers have planted Monsanto's new drought-tolerant maize variety already. But Monsanto has, in a partnership with some development agencies, foundations, has donated that technology to Africa through a project, WEMA, which is a water efficient maize project in Africa. It's now being promoted throughout East Africa. What I want you to note here, and it'll come up later, is the relationship between the private sector and biotechnology's promotion and expansion. And that's not a judgmental statement. That's again an observation as we begin to unravel the complexity of this issue. Most of the increased hectarage has been in the developing countries. They planted more hectares into biotech crops than the industrial countries for the second year in a row, and that growth continues to expand. Again, Latin America, Asia, and Africa farmers are growing a majority share of biotech crops, 54 compared to 46%. That doesn't look like such a large gap. Neither do the increases in the two respective sets of regions, 2% versus down. My own assessment, and it is supported by other information in the report, is that this trend really represents something of a plateau in adoption. The developed countries were very quick to adopt, very wide scale, and it's still just beginning to pardon the play on words, take root in Africa, and hence the slower growth. Also, among these three regions, based on the information that we just saw, most of that 54% is in Latin America and Asia. And Brazil is a major adopter of biotechnology. The report asserts that the developing countries are beginning to gain speed in terms of adopting biotechnology, noting that Bangladesh has recently approved a biotech eggplant. Indonesia has developed and approved biotech drought-tolerant sugarcane. Panama stacked biotech maize. In Africa, they continue to commercialize biotech crops, but only in three countries: South Africa, Burkina Faso, and Sudan. The latter two producing cotton, the first primarily maize. But they do note that biotech field trials are underway in 7 additional countries: Cameroon, Egypt, Ghana, Kenya, Malawi, Nigeria, and Uganda. We're going to hear a bit more about Uganda later in the presentation. So it would appear anyway, based on this information, that a number of countries are poised to adopt and begin commercialization of biotech crops. There's a little bit of well, I find his statement a little bit grandiose, that Africa and the developing countries are really the engines of growth. I think they're just the last or late adopters of technology. And the author has made the observation that in Burkina Faso and Sudan, there have been some substantial increases in the amount of biotech cotton, primarily, grown in just the last year, 50 and 300%. Oops, I'm sorry. This is another statement I'd like you to hold on to, or I think it will inform our discussion later. He says that looking ahead, it's the lack of an appropriate, science-based, time and cost-effective regulatory system that is the major constraint to adoption in Africa, as in many other developing countries. If you think about that, the lack of an appropriate, science-based regulatory system, to me that's a bit of a, it made me stop and think pretty hard then about how these crops are going to be monitored and regulated once they've been released. The report culminates in some pretty strong statements about the benefits of biotechnology, noting that it's increased crop production, well, not too much surprise there, that it's had environmental benefits as a result of reducing pesticides, okay, fair enough, that it's reduced CO2 emissions. I'm not sure to what extent we want to work that into our calculations, but it's on record. That there's been a conservation of biodiversity as a result of land savings, alleviating the need to expand into new areas, okay, because of higher production on existing lands. And then finally, the one that concerns the Borlaug Institute, myself, and some of you probably in the room, is that it has contributed to the alleviation of poverty for up to 16.5 million small farmers and families. I haven't seen the calculations on that, but that is certainly a very big assertion. So that's information coming out of the West. Let's hear what Africa has to say. Ghana has some trials underway, and that would, if accepted, approved, then would lead to commercialization of specific crops there. But now, I do ask your indulgence. Hopefully this will work well. There's a small advert. Let's see. Whoops. And we'll just have to suffer through the advert, but far so good. Here we're talking about rice, golden rice. This is the bit that we'll have to
When a
suffer
technology
through.
company.
Gary, while we're waiting on the advertisement, you have the 1 to 3% corn production you had in some of the African countries. Is that just corn that makes it into the marketplace, or does that include gardens and consumed?
That's commercial. From my time working in South Africa, it was all commercial. Oops, come on.
Near the city of Kumasi in rural Ghana is a crop that's causing much controversy. What's being grown here is genetically modified rice, which has been specifically engineered to use less fertilizer and tolerate salt, which supporters say can improve the yield by at least 30% and may hold the answers to combating hunger, vitamin deficiency and crop disease.
Once we explain what the technology can do, what the crop variety can do, the farmers want it right away. We tell them that no, we have to do a lot of testing, there are regulatory issues involved, we have to make sure that we do a lot of testing and convince the regulatory officials that the thing is hasn't got the kind of concerns people are raising before we release it.
But opinion on GM crops is divided across Africa. Burkina Faso, Egypt, Sudan and South Africa all have fully commercialized operations. Uganda, Cameroon and Malawi are also conducting field trials, but the likes of Zambia and Angola have imposed restrictions. Some opponents question the safety of food produced from the crops and say that it's almost impossible to stop them spreading outside their designated fields. Others cite a problem with the ownership of the seeds themselves. Traditionally, farmers save seeds for replanting in the next season, but GM seeds remain the intellectual property of the multinational agribusinesses that develop the technology, so farmers have to buy them.
Our farmers are going to rely solely on the seeds that have to be imported from these agribusinesses, Monsanto, Syngenta, and the rest of them, for the farmers to grow in Ghana. It's also not acceptable because it undercuts the sovereignty of Ghanaians.
2 years ago, Ghana passed its Biosafety Act, which is designed to oversee the issue of GM crops in the country. At a recent celebration for UN Food Day at Ghana's Parliament, the Deputy Minister of Agriculture strenuously denied accusations that the move towards GM crops is being rushed.
That is totally unfounded, because all these acts and regulations that are being put in place with respect to GM technology are acts that are to ensure that we are not bounced into an area of technology that we do not understand.
Ghana's biggest export crop is cocoa, and while there are no plans yet to introduce GM into the country, the confectionery giant Mars is funding research to create strains of cocoa that it claims will have health benefits and be resistant to pests and diseases. And while some cocoa farmers in Ghana are skeptical, others are keen to try them out.
When I heard of GM crops system, I was very happy. I know it's now coming to the system. I know it's going to help the cocoa to improve, to yield more, so that it can bear more fruits.
The likelihood of genetically modified cocoa being introduced into Ghana in the near future is pretty slight. But opponents and supporters of GM crops will continue to clash both here and throughout Africa. And the outcome, either way, may define the future of agriculture on this continent.
So that is public opinion coming from Ghana. In Uganda, in East Africa, different research is taking place. Let's hear what they have to say. A different crop.
Doesn't matter how tall the building is.
They're going to be speaking about tree crop banana. Actually, it's a cooking banana, locally known as matoke. The objective with this research is actually to improve the nutritional content of the cooking banana. But still, it's a staple crop, very important in the diet. Oops, sorry about that.
Typical adult will eat about 3 times his body weight in a year, but they're not all the same. Some, like these called bogoya, will ripen and be eaten raw. However, the most popular type of banana in Uganda is called matoke, as you can see here. Now, it is steamed and boiled, and some Ugandans will tell you they haven't eaten unless they've eaten matoke. The government wants to use Ugandans' love for the banana to improve their health, especially tackling the lack of vitamin A. The Health Ministry says 1 in 3 preschool children suffer from a deficiency of the nutrients, which leads to blindness and stunted growth. So enter the scientists at Kawanda Research Center near the capital, Kampala. They're developing what they call the golden banana. Once it's ripe, the center will be very orange rather than yellow.
What you're seeing here is a confined field trial for biofortified bananas. These are bananas that contain genes that enhance the amount of provitamin A or beta carotenoid in the banana fruit.
And the work begins in this lab, where the plants are grown right from petri dishes and test tubes. The scientists painstakingly separate cells and introduce new genes into the fruit. The idea is to make bananas that are not only more nutritious, but also resistant to diseases.
We are causing a revolution in African science. We've demonstrated that even in a third world country, we can develop those high-tech, the advanced products, which previously was not possible.
It is no more in terms of growing and of course it is what we want.
But some are already fighting the introduction of GM crops. These activists believe the government should instead put more money into traditional farming.
If time comes for the GMOs to be released in the environment, they will wholesomely receive it, but it is very dangerous. It will not be contributing to any agricultural development and agricultural growth. That means that the farmers who are in this case are supposed to be the primary targets of the GMOs must first of all have knowledge about what GMOs are.
But will Ugandans find the new bananas tasty enough? Will they even want to eat them? They will be as orange as the fruit. Catherine Biarahanga, BBC News, Kampala.
I thought you would find those little stories rather interesting, and they do juxtapose the numbers on the graphs and in the reports in a very different way, and they highlight a number of issues that I think rightfully deserve attention, and they're certainly in the public domain. Now, there are two questions that arise in my mind. I mean, there are many questions, but the two that come up foremost as a result of this information. And remember, I said hold on to this point in the report, and that the outlook for Africa, that they lack the regulatory systems in place to provide adequate control or management over biotechnology. So the first question was, in my mind, is Africa ready to manage the risk associated with genetically modified organisms? But at the same time, because of what we've seen in terms of its productivity, its ability to reduce the costs associated with pesticides, to imbue a product with and make it more nutritious by increasing its vitamin A content, those are all very desirable characteristics, and at the same time, as the American farmers said, reducing their cost of production. So does the so-called precautionary principle stand in the way of feeding Africa's hungry? Are you all familiar with the precautionary principle? I would think you probably have studied that extensively in your courses. I'll have Dr. Rooney explain it later to those who didn't get it when he lectured on it the first, second, or third time. So, and those questions have actually entered the debate not only in Africa but elsewhere in the world, and that's what we're going to see here. This one's very short. I think the advert's longer than the story itself. But
it doesn't matter how tall the building is.
I really tried to get rid of these. They're just impossible. So you have to. It's very clear who's behind all of these as well. Almost there.
Well, we feel that they're not adhering to the precautionary principle that's been outlined by the EU. Although they are small scale, and that's true, they are open air trials, and that's our problem with them really, is that they're being done in the open air. We're very happy for people to do whatever trials they like to do with GM in the laboratory, but they're bringing that into the open air, and there is a risk of cross-contamination and thus a danger to farmers and potentially to public health.
potential risks, but surely the benefits for what this could deliver must outweigh any sort of worries about those.
For us, I suppose we've been looking carefully at the examples set in Canada and the US, and contamination that's happened with the export of flax. So Canada, it ruined its export industry for flax, and also other cross-contamination issues that have taken place in the US that have led to patenting lawsuits against farmers, etc., etc. We understand that Rothamsted isn't a big corporation, they are a publicly funded research station, but those cross-contamination issues are still important when it's a wind-pollinated crop.
Okay, so enough movies for this lunch hour. I wanted, though, to share that with you because it does underscore what the report pointed to, which is that if a set of countries like the European Union are having difficulty in establishing the regulation or the controls for what they consider to be safe production, breeding, experimentation with GMO organisms, one can only imagine the difficulty that Africa would have in implementing those kinds of precautions as well. That being said, we've also been shown that various countries are moving ahead. Others are lining up to use various forms of biotechnology. And I dare say it's probably going to be difficult to really stop it for a range of reasons. Not even legislation, I think, would prevent the expansion of the use of biotechnology if it truly has the benefits that are being promoted. So that's just a way of starting the debate. In reflecting on it, I have to ask myself what the future of African agriculture looks like. Would it continue to look like this in the DRC? People planting seed using a stick and by hand, or plowing their fields, not using draft power, oxen, as you see here in Malawi? Or will they convert and make a transition to mechanized agriculture, as the Borlaug Institute is assisting them to do in the DRC? This is one of our projects in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Will they adopt biotechnology and overcome some of the issues, such as what you see here? This is a maize crop grown in South Sudan that's suffered from a lack of rain. I suspect there was also striga in the field, but then it was what was produced was hammered by birds and pests. Or could it look something like this? This is a commercial groundnut peanut seed farm in Malawi that's been planted under contract for groundnut seed by a very able, very competent farmer. So that's where we stand. And I now open to questions, or if people would like to discuss amongst themselves. That's why we're here. Yes.
I know there's a lot of lawsuits. There's a lot of accepting GMOs, but assuming that these African countries accept using GMOs in their crops, how can we ensure that what they produce is actually going to go feed the hungry instead of just being sold off? I'm just concerned that if you end up giving these countries GMOs with the intent that it's going to improve food security, that's not going to.
But I guess if you produce enough food to sell, you have money to buy whatever you want, don't you think?
I would think, but then if people like people in Darfur that are getting displaced, how do you feed those if you're not, with the corruption that goes on in Africa, how do you ensure that you feed the people who actually need it?
Well, there isn't any guarantee that maize grown in South Africa would leave and go and be sold in Zimbabwe, where they have a huge deficit, and they have dollarized their economy, so they have the dollars to pay for it, and they need it desperately. So, yeah, if I can get 50 to 100% more for my maize in Zimbabwe, why not? There isn't a guarantee. That's true. But as your colleague said, and it's true that most of these crops are being consumed locally. So there's a local market demand, and they will have to compete, for that if they want it, and there's an export market for it. If they're willing to pay the equivalent, then they can get it. But that then raises the question: could it end up driving up the price of food? So it's a fairly complex situation there. Sure.
How would you get these technologies in the hands of subsistence farmers that are just trying to feed themselves?
Mm-hmm.
Do they have the capital to invest in GMO seeds?
That's what you're hearing. You were hearing from the Ghanaian sovereignty movement. Typically, smallholders hold back some seed from year to year and replant. Now, of course, as you understand, it loses its hybrid vigor year after year, or it becomes more susceptible to certain pests or diseases. But what they are opposed to, a number of them, are the fact that once they acquire biotech or GM maize or cowpea, whatever, they would be pulled into a system that required them to buy year after year, and they don't necessarily have the money to do that. How would you get it into their hands? Well, a lot of times it's people have to buy whatever's available, and if it is available. And you also saw that the Monsanto has partnered with a number of agencies and donated that technology, not to North America or Europe, where they've decided to pull out their GM products, but to Africa, where they don't have the regulatory programs in place to monitor and manage. And I'm not casting aspersions, but I'm making an observation.
So is government providing any subsidy or something
to
farmers?
Typically, we do see subsidization in the form of floor prices. Price fixing. You may not. This is the price for maize. You will buy maize at this price, or sometimes the only outlet you have for selling your maize is into a cooperative system, which is actually run and owned by the government, and then that's spun off and sold at a different price. So there's a subsidy between the purchase price and the sales price. Sorry, yes?
On the case of the golden banana, it's like similar to golden rice, right?
It is, yes. It's beta carotene.
If I understood right, golden rice wasn't very big of success on India because it changed the color of the rice. Would there be a problem there?
Well, it's a good question, and the last thing that the BBC correspondent asked is, will it be adoptable? Will it be adopted? Will people wish to eat a banana that's as orange on the inside as an orange fruit? And there have been many efforts to introduce an orange-fleshed sweet potato in Africa. Here in North America, most people believe that all sweet potatoes are orange. It's not that way. They're white to yellow in flesh in Africa. But they began to the International Potato Center developed an orange-fleshed sweet potato, introduced it into the tropics, subtropics. It's really only now beginning to gain speed, but it was an unusual thing. Very much like many of you, if you go to the tropics, if you go to the Indian subcontinent, Africa, bananas are not yellow; they're green. You look, and your first reaction is going to be, "That's not a ripe banana." That's perfectly ripe. That's its natural state, up to a point. They're only yellow because they've been marketed that way here by Chiquita and others, and ethylene's been used to convert them. Sorry, sir.
Yeah. So this opposition, kind of overall opposition against the GMOs in Africa and in most countries in Africa, is that direct kind of influence of European Union, or is more indirect in terms of losing the market, European market, especially that's true for cotton. I think a lot of cotton is exported to Europe. So.
Why are you asking me all these complicated questions? It's a complicated answer, and it varies from place to place, from organization to organization. I have personally witnessed and heard some horrific misinformation about genetically modified foods, or frankenfoods, as they could be known. Even I have it somewhere in my office, a clipping of a member of parliament in Tanzania talking. Urging the parliament to ban genetically modified organisms in their country because they would end up harming unborn babies, and leading to disfiguration and that sort of thing. And this is a member of parliament, right? So, on the one issue is that there's a lot of bad information, misinformation, and given levels of education, it's oftentimes easy to persuade someone that this is something other than what it really is and how it will affect you. Commercially, that is also true that Europe has imposed some very strong legislation that would eliminate markets for certain products coming from Africa if it's genetically modified. Not that they refuse, but the labeling issues would heavily restrict it and impose cost on the producers, therefore pricing them out of the market. So both reasons, and even more. The seed issue is another one. All right. I'm afraid to let you speak. Go ahead. Bring that conversation. I know.
First of all, thank you very much for taking time and giving such a nice presentations. We all thank you very much for your efforts. You and me spent quite a bit of our time in Africa, and one table you did not show. You showed the total production, the yield, but the fertilizer use in Africa versus the rest of the world. And that's why Africa missed the green revolution, where seed was free, improved seed, they didn't have to invest anything. And still, Africa uses less than 10 kilogram of nutrients per hectare per year, compared to 300 in China, So whether it is GM or regular varieties, the food production depends upon the improved variety, the management, and political will.
Right.
The management is inputs mainly, and fertilizer is one of the key essentials. Political will is still not much political will in Africa. Many of the rich people who are rulers, they think we are not poor because they have a lot of resources. So the problem in food security in Africa is still the inputs and the political will. Now GM, I am hoping that once GM comes, in the name of GM, some inputs will come, just like the hybrid seed. If I buy hybrid seed, I also buy some fertilizer. Now coming back to GM, most of your third world data is only cotton, BT cotton, no food crop. Right. And even in the US, it is cotton and soybean, which are most commercial crop, and it goes to the meal goes to the cattle, and the oil we use at this. But maize here, BT maize, also mostly feed. So food crop GM has a problem, not because of the technology. India, for example, spent billions of rupees on biotechnology research. We came up with BT eggplant, you're aware of it, through Monsanto and India. It was approved by the Biosafety Committee, the genetically approving committee, but the environmentalists, a few of them, came and hijacked the whole thing. Environmental ministers was hijacked, and they still it is not approved. I'm happy that Bangladesh has approved it. Now Pakistan is trying to approve it, and it will leak through that border to India. So the problem is environment. The problem is environmentalists. How do we? A lot of money from environmentalists come to India and Africa to protest against this thing. Not that India is spending money. How do we influence them? Because these technologies are well proven. There is no danger, no nothing. But and India, for example, doesn't work on herbicide tolerant soybean because we export meal to Europe. They will not import it if we do it. So how do we handle that issue is what we should be discussing. And maybe USAID and international programs and others should try to talk to this environmental lobby, not to keep world poor, and ignorant. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And Professor Singh is absolutely correct. The variance in the yields is associated with a lot of different things. I thought I'd said something about that, but one aspect is starting with the germplasm itself. So yes.
You talked about how the EU has a risk assessment program.
Oh, yeah.
Do you care to talk about that, or Dr. Rooney?
Well, I'd leave that to Dr. Rooney. The regulator, if he knows, I don't know about it extensively. The margins between fields of GM crops and non-GM crops is, I think it's set at 300 yards. Here in this country, it's 100, much less. And it was interesting to note there's a case that is going to the High Court, Supreme Court rather, in Australia currently, where two farmers on adjacent farms, he is maintaining that his oats, and I believe it was also maize, were contaminated by his neighbor's GMO rapeseed, and so his oats and the other crop were rejected when he went to sell them as non-GMO. It appears to me that there's a huge need for continued education. I do believe people have a right to choice. That if I don't wish to eat GMO for whatever reason, I'm just not convinced. I have no problem whatsoever with food being labeled. I think we all have a right to know what we're eating, and I think it. No, I'm sorry to express personal opinion, but I'll steer away from that. I think people have a right to know what they're ingesting.
You're talking about the precautionary principle?
Yes.
As far as I know, the precautionary principle is, and maybe a lot of people don't know.
Oh, go ahead, Will.
Deals with the concept that you have groups that are opposing this technology on the fear that it causes problems, it leads to contamination, it's going to cause all these worldwide problems. The precautionary principle says, yes, there is a risk in deploying any technology. It doesn't matter whether it's agriculture, industrial. I mean, there's a risk in you driving your car to work in the morning. But so if you do not deploy the technology because you're afraid of the resulting impact of said technology, that you further delay improvements that would have occurred naturally with the deployment of that technology, thereby depriving a society of the benefits of that technology if you had let it evolve.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so by not doing this, you're costing someone 50 years from now the ability to do something a lot better. And that's the precautionary propensity.
You can release things, and if there's a problem afterwards, you kind of...
Well, we have chosen to accept that, okay? And that's why we, for the most part, have accepted, and farmers have driven. And what Gary said about this stuff, once it gets out there, farmers take it and use it.
They will.
They will. That's why it's approved in Brazil, because they couldn't keep it from coming into
And
Argentina.
there's very little capacity to segregate, as we do here in this country and in Europe, or segregate non-GMO and GMO grains from the farm to the trucks, to the silos, to the mills. Very little capacity to do that. But it's a huge issue coming back to feeding people. Even the World Food Program, they will not buy GMO grain whole. The irony is that they will buy flour that consists of GMO grain, but they don't buy, and they will include that in their ready-to-use therapeutic foods, etc. So I have to get my head around that one too. Sir.
Thank you. I think we need to have a distinction here between malnutrition and the calorie deficit vis-a-vis the contribution of GM technology. Because if we talk of calories, I think it goes along with what Dr. Singh was talking about. Increased production rather than nutritional content to solve the calorie deficit. Otherwise, I don't see so much contribution of GM technology at this juncture in improving calorific uptake among the African people. It is increased production of what is available, of course, mixed up with the breeding technologies and all that. But then GM technology per se, I don't think is a panacea for solving calorific content of the foods. Having said that, it is my opinion that the uptake of the technology, as you see is here in the US, you see not so many food products benefit from the GM technology, just like in any other part of the world. So Africa is no exemption in this case. It is the increased production, having the necessary agricultural inputs that is very urgent in Africa, including irrigation and fertilization.
Thank you for that comment. Does anyone want to rebut or?
Yeah, I mean, what do you make of golden rice and golden banana? I think there was a similar attempt to produce this biofortified sorghum, which was supposed to address the nutritional deficiencies. So that's not production, that's directly, targeted to solve this particular problem.
Exactly, and we remember that here in the US we don't have golden rice and golden banana. People have been existing without them.
But we don't need it.
But then, you see, having a variety of crops that provide, an aggregate nutritional value is more important than just elevating one nutritional component within a single crop whose production does not really provide all calorific value for the population. I'm not saying that GM technology doesn't have a place, but then let's put it in this right place so that the right information goes out to the people and then they can benefit from that very technology.
You had a question?
No, we're out of time.
All right, so let's thank Dr. Mullins.